So this very last video for Web3 is going to talk about how to make the project pages for your work. So the extra pages, the 4 extra pages, one for each one of your pieces of work to show up on your website. But before we talk about that, I want to at least mention a product that Adobe gives for free as part of your Creative Cloud, and it's called XD. And it's called Experience Designer, but it's XD, and it's for prototyping websites and apps. Now, if you really get into this, or if you're not really into coding even, and you're just interested in web design, it's a front-end design tool that allows you to do what's called a prototype, and I'll kind of show you what that is. But if you just Google Adobe XD, you can get into that. In 133, there's a UX design module that would get into designing an actual mobile app. You don't have to code anything, it's just working on the design. So it's called UX and UI. So user experience, how people interact with your design, and then UI is user interface, so buttons and interface design to allow people to navigate and make it usable. So there's some cool stuff that you can do without actually having to really be able to program all of it. Knowing how to code a little bit is important, because I think it's important to know that before you really start diving into UX and UI, because you can appreciate how it might be made. But so Adobe XD, you can check that out. What it looks like is like this. It's actually one of the easiest Adobe products out there, so I totally recommend trying it out. You essentially get these artboards like Illustrator, you design it, and then you can prototype it, so you can essentially hook up the different buttons. So it kind of jumps from screen to screen. You can hit play and you get something that looks like this. So you could be able to click around and actually try it. And so this is what we're going to work on. We're going to say, if they click on this, here's one of the project pages. So you'll build one of these out and then you'll make copies. So I'll get you started on that, but then you'll need to build out. But it's pretty straightforward. You have images, you have text, whatever you want to kind of put it in. And it can look however you want. It doesn't have to look like this. I'm just going to kind of get you started. It could be one big image. We talked about sliders or plugins in a past video. So you could actually put a lightbox on all these images. You could put a slider and put the text underneath. Just kind of however you want it to look like at that point is what I want you to be thinking about. But what Adobe XD is allows you to develop that look. So it's a designer's tool at that point to really figure out what you want it to look like. And I used it for this project. Like, this is what I wanted it to look like. So now let's build it out in code before we spend a lot of time coding and decide we don't like it. Right? And the last thing I think I'll mention in terms of Adobe XD is when you play it, you can actually record it. So when you play it, there's this little record button. And when we record it, it'll actually record an MP4 of an interaction. So this is a great way to actually showcase like something that you've built in XD or a prototype and actually use it for your portfolio. So it's something to think about. So it'll save an MP4 there for you. So it's worth checking out. Long story short, check out XD and you got some cool stuff to play around with. Okay. Now, back to how we actually make project HTML files. We've kind of already done this, so I'm not going to belabor the point. But what I'd recommend is figure out, like, do you like this layout? Do you like, this layout that might be 1 column or 2 columns? You figure out kind of how many columns you think you're going to have. You can use XD and kind of prototype it out, or just sketch it out in wireframes. That's cool too. For mine, I was like, okay, I'll just use the home page. I'll have like images over here and I'll have text over here, right? So I can build that really quick. All we're going to do is we're going to take the index file and file, save as, and we're going to call it project1.html. Now, before you do this, one thing you want to make sure is you have all the things we did earlier, like the metadata, the viewport, font awesome, all that kind of stuff working before you do this, because you're making copies at this point, right? You've by now figured out that if you did it on index.html, you needed to do it on work.html. Now we're making a third, you're going to make a 4th, 5th, and 6th page, so you want to make sure you have, the most part, everything going the way you want it to. Okay, so I'm essentially going to take out the content, right? I'm going to leave the header and I'm going to leave the image. So I can just really take this out and put it here, this out and put it on this side. And we can save it, and now we can jump back into Chrome and we can kind of see like, all right, we should have something that looks like image on the left, text on the right. Yeah, so that's pretty straightforward, and the rest of it you know how to do really. It's definitely repetition and practice, but we essentially need to save images of our work inside of the images folder. So if I go to my little prototype that I had, when I click on this image, I want it to go to this page, so I need an image for each one of these, right? So I would go into Photoshop and save those like we talked about for the image optimization. Save them to the size you want them. Move them into your images folder, right? And then inside of the project HTML files, you can call out those images and just stack them on top of each other. You can style them how you want it. You can add borders, you can add captions, whatever it is. You really need to, at this point, think about like what kind of portfolio or what kind of work are you showing here, and figure out how to display it that works with your particular medium that you're working on. Okay, so that's how we can actually make the project. Obviously, you're going to have to do that 3 more times, so you'll essentially have kind of a full-blown site that will allow you to kind of see your work and be able to click around what will essentially be a 6-page site that's responsive, it's search ready, it's optimized for search, you got your images optimized, you got some plugins going on, and you have a pretty decent site, a pretty decent start for a site. So obviously let us know if you have questions at this point. It's meant to be a little bit more challenging at this point. We've covered all the bits and pieces, and now you're going to be able to try some of these things on your own and really develop it in the way that you want it to look, that kind of matches your style or matches your brand or what you're kind of interested in doing. Okay? Good luck, and I appreciate you working so hard on the web. I think it's super important, especially now that everything's digital. So come find us if you have questions, and look forward to seeing your websites.